Don DeLillo is one of the greatest American novelists of all time, and today he is going to advise you and I at length on how to construct a novel. And DeLillo is one of the goats because many people complain that some authors that Americans love, like Stephen King, are too entertaining, and other authors like Pynchon or Wallace or McCarthy are too convoluted and complicated. But Don DeLillo, at his best, and in many of his better novels, blends entertainment and depth in such a beautiful way. And if you look at the playlist down below, you will find a small library detailing DeLillo's writing philosophy, his books, and his life. And I plan to expand that playlist to hundreds of videos over the next 3 to 5 years. And if you guys are new to the channel, I also cover plenty of other authors, and I'm glad to have you with me. And so, enough for me, everyone. Let us now hear from DeLillo. I think the scene comes first, an idea of a character in a place. It's visual, it's technicolor, something I see in a vague way. And this may seem somewhat elementary to some of you guys out there, and it's almost a taboo topic in the writing world. But there are different inception philosophies or inception points for authors in terms of how they start to form their novel. And more importantly, there are different paths, especially at the start, to getting the novel off the ground. And so Don DeLillo is using strong language here. He's saying it's visual. It's like Technicolor. He's seeing the scene. But if you think about it, 4% of the population has aphantasia and cannot properly see images or use their imagination or vivid mental imagery very strong. And there are people like my wife who don't have aphantasia, but her poetry starts with, as she describes, like the feeling of a memory in the back of your head. And it's a feeling, it's not a visual. And then there are some more logical people who just build it. They get a mental idea and almost force it into existence. And no one way is the best way. And I don't think it should be taboo to talk about because there are some people who I imagine don't maybe understand the other options and have never tried it. And they are just stuck in one way that they heard that they need to do. But as someone who reads about authors all the time and learns about kind of how the inception of their novels, I've personally found that many of my favorite authors, and I would say most authors, do something very similar to DeLillo. They get a strong mental scene, an image like I'm like this. I get, I've had dreams or these like massive daydreams that are the inception point. And authors who are like this do really well in literary fiction, in my opinion, because if you combine someone who has strong and vivid, images in their head with writing talent and intellect, the novel is the perfect vehicle over 100,000 words up to 550,000 words, if not more, to kind of see that through. And with the ability to use interiority and massive amounts of description that other artistic mediums don't have, the novel does really well. Okay, returning back to DeLillo. Then sentence by sentence into the breach, no outlines, maybe a short list of items, chronological, that may represent the next 20 pages. But the basic work is built around the sentence. This is what I mean when I call myself a writer. I construct sentences. And this is the number one, I would say, weakness of authors in the modern era. This is the number one thing people neglect, which is sentence structure, learning to write better sentences, spending deliberate time, dozens of hours, if not hundreds of hours, imitating and learning about different sentences and really thinking deeply about them. Because when I look at, I've literally, all their archives are right next to each other. Don DeLillo, Cormac McCarthy, and David Foster Wallace. They are all sentence freaks. If you go look at their early drafts, they spend an insane amount of time working through sentences. Cormac McCarthy, who is who is known for massive amounts of revision, would be interested in revising certain sentences for 5 or 6 years. He would just keep coming back to them and messing with them and drawing from other sources to increase their power. And I would say most of the great literary fiction novelists out there are 100% focused on sentences and are masters of the sentence. And I'm for sure setting a very high bar here. And in this context, because we're talking about Don DeLillo and the literary greats, that's what you need to do if you want to compete with them. But that isn't what you need to do if you are a beginner and you're just trying to have some people read your stuff or get published or anything like that. And I think the partial resistance to sentence, studying sentence structure is that most people actually don't, and I'm not to be condescending here, don't understand hard work and how to get really good at things, because it can be very easy to just slip into a lull with your writing and feel like that if you write every single day and you're spending the time on the page writing, that's all you need. And at some level, if you are smart enough and study enough and read enough, you can figure out all the sentence structure hacks and techniques all on your own. It's just going to take a little bit longer. But I just have to assume, because I'm not, that most of us out there aren't savants, aren't intellectual geniuses, and are going to need direct help with our sentence structure. And improving something as concrete as your sentence structure and how you approach sentences and the power of them in your writing is as akin to a sport as you can get in writing, because, or, studying for a science exam. And many people feel that it's somewhat icky to be engaging in that, icky to be not viewing yourself as already perfect and imitating other people and starting to integrate their frames and structures into your work. But it would be so silly to think that not copying and not getting into the mind and stealing and imitating and expanding upon the sentence structures that have built the greatest works of all time by authors who studied everyone else's sentence structure, like not utilizing that is really dumb. And I swear to God, I would like to say it's like an ego thing, but really it's just a time thing that many people underestimate the time that they need to put in to their writing and to writing skills to reach kind of a good level of writing. And I've done this myself. I am not sitting here saying that I am an expert writer. I'm sitting here saying I'm on this journey too. This is what I need to focus on. This is the hardest thing for me to do. Guys, to sit down with my book or one of my mini books on sentence structure and do it for 2 hours, I would rather do anything. But it's something that you have to do. It's something that I have to force myself to do. But what's fun is that it's once you get into it, nothing's better. Like seeing how writers put together their words and being blown away. It's amazing. And just the range of style. I went to public school in Nevada. We're always ranked near the bottom in America. I was more motivated as a reader than a writer. And I swear to God, sometimes I read sentences by Delillo and some of these people behind me, and I feel like their style is just so beautiful. I feel like they are just on a totally different level than me. And some people would call that pretentiousness and elitism, but I just see that they were raised in a much more positive or expansive or direct way than, many of us just watching cartoons and reading, random fun novels, not having any direct instruction over the course of, sometimes decades in the art of writing beautifully. Because when you read a lot of the classics, when you read a lot of the best authors of all time, many were in the aristocracy or had very beautiful upbringings, had like the perfect environment to see them through. The whole traumatized artist with the hard life is mostly a myth. There are outliers. There are people who obviously fit that bill. But in general, most writers were made to be writers. Like, for instance, it just came out of nowhere. This is why I don't always believe in free will. Like Italo Calvino, the Italian author, just came into my head. And people say all the time that, he's original. He never imitated anyone. But his parents, if I remember correctly, were like professors or... Yeah, I'm looking now. They were both professors. He was around a very strong group of individuals in college and a strong literary circle. And that gave him the base to write, really expansive and experimental things like Invisible Cities and If on a Winter's Night, a Traveler. And that's something that, I talk crap about MFA programs all the time, but it's mostly because I feel like, first of all, you don't know what program you're going into. You don't know if you're going to click with your professor, and that could create a problem like David Foster Wallace had with his program. And I know I've experienced that. I know other people have experienced that, going into a university writing workshop with someone that just isn't on your wavelength. Not to say that you're better, but you're not aligned. And it turns into a waste of time, or the program isn't serious in the sense that I know that I took an entire class on sentence structure. I know that many of the best programs, really, really focus on that, because you can't influence too much someone's motivation or their talent or their imagination, but you can teach them the basic skills in a creative writing program. And so I know dozens of really smart people who have gotten an MFA in creative writing who went through legitimate programs, and they are fine readers. They are good writers too, But that's one of the sad things about kind of the MIC MFA factory system now, that you could get an MFA at most universities in America and not be able to write one beautiful sentence. You could just be releasing a bunch of average sentences. And so back to you guys, novels are built sentence by sentence. and are one of the major pieces of the pie. Like, or I should say, it's one of the major choke points. I don't know if any of you guys ever think about like choke points in your life, or I should call this the theory of constraints, but with most writers, there is a bottleneck or a constraint. And so if you guys see it right here, it's probably about 50% of this pipe. And so the constraint, though, limits the volume. So even if you have a really good imagination and a really good story, if your sentence structure is off for one of the other major elements, and it's a choke point, and that is the limit of how good it can actually be. And at some point, you reach a baseline where eventually, the other areas could become huge, but many authors don't hit baselines. And that's why they're not seen as professional authors or kind of get off the ground. And so once again, I've seen that sentence structure and writing sentences is one of the big things. And alongside of that, actually understanding that those sentences are meant for people, because I know people who write beautiful sentences. I follow some people on Substack that shock me all the time. They write these beautiful sentences, but I don't know what the fuck is happening in their story half of the time. Like, they don't understand transitions and anchoring and, building a mood and a vibe, as well as like, just pure sentence structure, mania. And that's something that can happen because, like I said, when you view it and realize that it's very competitive, that it's something that you could attain no matter if you're like a logic bro with no feeling in your heart, then you could just turn that into the whole thing. And we've all read authors kind of like that, where you're just kind of like under the weight of their I should say you're fatigued from their sentences. And so helping me out here, let's return to Delillo. There's always another word that means nearly the same thing. And if it doesn't, then I'll consider altering the meaning of a sentence to keep the rhythm, the syllable beat. I'm completely willing to let language press meaning upon me. Watching the way in which words match up, keeping the balance in a sentence, those are sensuous pleasures. And guys, hear what Delillo is saying here. Hear the level that he's going to. He's talking about contemplating on a word by word basis how different groupings interact with each other in a sensuous way, or in a balanced or more spiritual way. There is a layer of almost unconscious language and rhythm and flow that we've all gotten into when you're revising and building sentences. But there's always further you can go. You can always continue to add rhythm and language and certain vowels, or, are you going to use Old English verbs or Latin verbs? What contrast are you doing? How about the sentence length? It can go on and on and on. And most people, like most of you guys, aren't thinking, should I use a Latin verb here or an Old English verb? Because I know that they're going to create two different unconscious reactions in the brain. And if you want to write like Stephen King or just be a normal writer, then you don't need to be thinking about that. But if you want to compete, and I hate to use the word compete, but if you want to be at the top, then that's what you need to do. And you don't need to go to the top. Like, people all the time are like, you put too much pressure on this. I'm talking about Don DeLillo here. I'm not talking about writing like J.K. Rowling right now. I'm not here to serve your own insecurities or your direction. I'm here to speak about how to reach the standard of Don DeLillo. I have other videos that have different standards or a different direction. We'll talk about that another time. And so it takes something psychic. It takes something deep within you to understand the balance of a sentence. This is where talent, this is why, not every nonfiction author or every person can become a fiction author. This is why it's an art form. Continuing on, I might want very and only in the same sentence, spaced in a particular way, exactly so far apart. I might want rapture matched with danger. I like to match word endings. I type rather than write longhand because I like the way words and letters look when they come off the hammers onto the page. Finished, printed, beautifully formed. And so there's a quick piece of technical knowledge of, just he likes to pair word endings together, And that's also one of the hidden powers of gerunds and verbal adjectives that, words that end in ing and ed, first of all, are the most powerful words in the English language, but then also can kind of create a rhythm and a flow. And you see people like Cormac McCarthy and others kind of utilize that. And, some of the, even DeLillo and Pynchon, when you see an author who can write almost a whole page that's one sentence, most of the time it's fueled by verbal adjectives and gerunds. And there's a rhythm to it when you read it, and it's because of the word endings in conjunction with kind of the inherent power of those types of verbs. And so that's how you start writing a novel. You find an idea that is so powerful that it consumes you, and you build it sentence by sentence. And even if you think that you are revising your novel as you go along, you're not. And you need to actually revise your novel. And that's why you need to write your first draft in a very relaxed way. Nothing frustrates me more than people who just waste time on their first drafts. I have a student right now in my creative writing club. I'm a high school teacher, and he's a good writer, and he's been working on a first draft of a novel for like over a year, and he works on it all the time, and he's just revising as he goes. And so I hope you guys don't fall into the same trap and build and build and build. Think about sentences, think about your reader. Even if you are writing something more lighthearted, sentence structure is still important. So boom, there you guys have it. Thank you guys for being here. If you guys want to support me, I have links down in the description below of free and paid ways to support me or get to know me or be a part of my book club or a bunch of other stuff. And I will see you guys very soon in tomorrow's video.